Hello, Ridge Racers, and welcome to a bonus edition of Memory Card Lane, the nostalgia show, brought to your eyes and ears by the First Aid Spray podcast and our wonderful backers over at Patreon. You can support the show for as little as $1 a month, and additional tiers offer access to early and bonus content just like this. To find out more, visit patreon.com/FASprayPod. In this bonus episode, we are looking back through our PSP wing mirror at the infamous E3 2006 Sony Conference. I'm your host, Jordan, and joining me for this post-mortem is none other than Steve Valance. How are you, Steve?
Surviving.
Let's start off with explaining where Pilot Wings is. Where is it, Steve? Come on, where is it? Where is it?
So you know when life finds a way to do things that you aren't expecting, like you're trying to get a D&D game with your friends, and you just can't quite sync up. It's been a case of that.
Yeah, scheduling in your 30s, it's tricky.
Yeah, we're all very busy people doing very busy things. And
Absolutely. And in Sherwin's case, even though we were about to cover a game about flying, he actually did get on a plane and fly away. He went on a trip. And I believe he actually met up with Adam, right?
I believe so, but I'm not sure if he had enough points to actually gain that license.
Well, regardless, it was a point of disloyalty, and Sherwin is off the podcast. Just kidding, he's back for the next one. Pilot Wings will be out soon, but first we thought we'd do a little bonus episode, go into something that can't necessarily show up on a wheel, and it's the infamous E3 2006 Sony Conference. So Steve, tell us what E3 is about.
The main thrust is that it started out more as a developer trade show where they go in and they show, here's this new thing we're working on with some promotional material, which is snowballed to the point now where it is the big tent where you go to see all the trailers, isn't it? Like Tokyo Game Show and the Game Awards are fine, but E3's the big one. Like if you're going to announce a new console, you're probably going to do it here. Or at least maybe up until recent years. It's definitely a big thing. That became more and more commercialized and consumer interactive than it used to be. It used to be more press conferencey.
Yeah, it was usually a bit more of an intimate affair, especially the games conferences and the keynote. And then eventually they kind of got to this point where they were clearly more spectacles for fans, for people who were now able to watch it online, which is especially the case for 2006. It was one of the first instances where people could watch live in a pretty wide, accessible manner. To now, where it's in a bit of a strange place post-pandemic, but over the last 10 years, it's kind of... Some of them have felt more like political rallies, to be quite honest. It's been through many different mediums and shapes and figures over the years. What's your experience been with E3, Steve?
Hit and miss. Like in this notorious E3 2006 conference, I actually only heard about it second and after the fact because I was... should we say, off the internet at that time. I was living in a place where we just didn't have access to it, and I was a carer, so I was kind of two minds of whether I can really distract myself to watch it. So yeah, it was very different. It wasn't until more recent years, like the 2010s and stuff, when 360 was on its way out and PS4 was on the horizon, that I was really more invested. You know, obviously there's lots of streams and stuff going back then, so I was more like, I've got someone to sit and watch them pontificate about it with. But until then, yeah, it was literally something I'd hear about on Games Master and other magazines and stuff like that.
Yeah, that definitely seemed the case up until maybe late 2000s, where most of the news was coming out secondhand. But 2006 was definitely when I first got into it proper. I had kind of followed news from E3 2004 and 2005. E3 2005 especially, it was that cresting of the next generation. It got a lot of people excited. There were a lot of obviously big promising looking trailers there. But 2006 was the one that was first really accessible to me. In fact, on the 360, they were streaming the whole of the Microsoft conference. Plus, they were sending demos like Dead Rising and Lost Planet to people's consoles. So you could actually download some of the games that were going to be at the show floor. It's weird because I've never seen an E3 quite like that since. I would love if there were demos that you could get of unreleased games coming out so soon after their reveal at E3. That said, I have been very passionate follower of E3 for all the years. I'm fascinated with it as a bit of a gaming circus. It's always entertaining, even when there's bad conferences.
This one is infamous and legendary for many reasons I'm sure we're going to get into, but I want to pay lip service to the fact that these days, I know you fell a bit out of luster with it, but the almost festival-like culture that builds around it, even not necessarily the companies themselves. You know, the fact that it's a week-long event, you'll normally get communities gathering together in their Discords or group chats or whatever and just do group watching nights and things. And it's nice.
Set the stage, 2006. E3's round the corner and Sony are cock of the walk. Riding a 10-year wave of success, they're going into the conference not the first out the gate, but adamant that the best is yet to come. The Xbox 360 is already out by this point, The Elder Scrolls Oblivion had been out a couple of months, so next gen was there if people wanted it, but personally, I knew a lot of people who were holding out for the PS3. And why not? The showings at the latest E3 were incredible. I mean, did you see that sweat smoking off Jin Kazama, bro? The 2005 show was almost too good to be true, and most of it was. The 2006 show was too bad to be forgotten. But how is it really? Let's find out.
Oh god, 2005. I'm sure we had the conferences on disc. There was a lot of pre-rendered trailers of stuff that would never even come out. And I distinctly remember, I'm sure it's like an exploding gas station with an impossible explosion, and Killzone with over-the-top fire effects that are even now bizarre and clearly PS3 uncanny CG from a pre-rendered cutscene. Very, very different times.
It was ridiculous, but it set your mind on fire just thinking, wow, like, all of this could be coming next year? You know, it was just kind of, it was crazy. The birth of the bullshots, as they called it.
When was the rule that, you know, not actual video game footage had to be displayed on trailers? I'm trying to think when that rule comes into effect.
It was whenever we started to get games that just did not look like their trailers. Tekken's one of them. Tekken comes out this year of 2006, and it looks wildly different. There is no sweat like coming off Jin Kazama in a kind of like a vapor. It's not there.
I'm fairly certain the technology isn't there now. You know,
No, we're just getting to peach fudge. It's peach fudge? What? We're just getting to peach fuzz right now on cheeks. So we have to give it another generation, and that's when we will get the steam vapor shoulders and whatever else. Sony Pictures Studio in Culver City, California. President and CEO of Sony America, Kaz Hirai, arrives on stage and apologizes for the delay. It wouldn't be a Sony conference without one. He's ready. He's got his big pink shirt on. Seriously, look at those sleeves. And he delivers the opening speech of the conference and an introduction to the philosophy of the PlayStation 3. The PS3 is their most ambitious project, Kaz says, putting emphasis on the importance and versatility and system longevity. We're not about rushing a product to market. The next generation doesn't start until we say it does. Probably a bit of a dig at the 360, or more just generally a necessary response to Sony being uncharacteristically late to the market.
And we're certainly not interested in gimmicks, clever rhetoric, or conventional thinking.
And we're not interested in gimmicks. We'll see.
Oh, we'll see. We'll see about that one. Yeah.
As moves on to talking about the PlayStation 2, which has sold over 100 million units, which is not a bad flex, and I guess they'd earned it. But the eventual lifetime number for the PS2 settled at 158 million units sold, which is the best-selling console of all time for now. But still, the fact that it's 2022 and the PS2 is still the best-selling console of all time is pretty fantastic. Like, that's crazy numbers.
I mean, yeah, fair play to Sony and everything, because I know we're probably going to be roasting a lot of them on this little endeavor here, but yeah, the PS2 is the cornerstone, I think, of gaming history.
There's also a slide of some upcoming PS2 games, including God of War 2, and Okami, and Yakuza. So some strong games in there, even quite late into the PS2's lifespan. Some strong games in there, and Dirge of Cerberus.
Oh god.
To be honest, I kind of consider the later end of PS2's lifespan to actually be better than its opening. There's some really good games in there that almost feel like they could have been moved over to the PS3 late, but they ended up being a really good send-off to the PS2 itself.
Definitely. Yeah, Final Fantasy 12, for example, I feel like that could have easily made it to PS3. The visual quality on that game and the level of detail, it's just a fantastic little piece, although it runs at like 20 frames, so get the remake that was re-released and everything else these days. Yeah.
and still see how good it looks.
It's strange, isn't it, when you think about it? Like MGS3, for example, like, you know, yeah, it looks way better than MGS2, but it also runs at half the frame rate. And so definitely, if that had been shunted on a PS3 as a launch title, that would have been explosive.
It's so strange for, I think, like, especially all these Sony consoles right at this point, PS2, PS3 as well did this, where it's sort of, the technology is complicated and it took a long while for them to get the visuals that you can get out of those consoles. But Sony would inevitably be proven right, because a lot of those late offerings are some of the best looking for their generation. Things like Shadow of the Colossus, things like Snake Eater. Some of those games are still breathtaking. PSP's doing well, 17 million units shipped. The final tally, estimated 80 million, so just outside the top 10, and kind of a surprise for me. I didn't realize that it did that well. We also get some games, but the sizzle reel for PSP is definitely a bit, they're showing stuff like Planet PSP, which is a travel guide. They also show Killzone Liberation, which is a decent little title, definitely worth checking out. But overall, definitely a shallow lineup of games. Just think, there was a time when Sony hired out an auditorium of over 50 screens, and all of them showing footage of B-Boy.
Oh, no, I think Loco Roco looks nice. Good enough to migrate onto the bigger system. So at this point, in this whole early parts of, I mean, it's the same in the previous conference if you watch it, that they're very stockholder meeting focused of statistics, and while trying to float up just how great they are.
Yeah, this is the proper business stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it's that era of E3 though. So, they're obviously going to be talking to stockholders directly and press people directly.
To illustrate how these conferences weren't always exclusively catering towards gamers, Kaz takes a moment to explain the basic format and capability of UMD over a year into the PSP's lifespan. Do you know how UMDs work? It's like a disc, and it's in plastic. That's it.
Yeah, it's just...
It's still a disc. It's like... He should have just said, remember mini disc? It's that. Remember how successful mini disc was? It's that. It's kind of weird to think that it even existed in that very sort of strange period just before you were starting to get cartridges which were capable of the memory storage that discs had at the time. So, yes, PSP overall, quite a proper timepiece, that console.
I'm gonna beat you, and it's gonna hurt, because I don't know.
Cut to a video package of people on the street talking PlayStation 3, and they hear the graphics was crazy. We hear from people all over the world who I'm convinced aren't actors, but they're definitely being fed some sound bites. What are you looking forward to with the PlayStation 3? Someone says Blu-ray discs. Not games on Blu-ray discs, just the discs themselves. She's seen the charts. You can't fool her. She knows those bandwidths. The whole package is pretty weak. Bear in mind, there is still very little of the PS3 to see or interact with proper before this conference, so they're trying to represent hype that is yet to exist. Although it does give us, when I play games, I become a monkey.
Oh god, I forgot about that. Yeah.
Onto the actual hardware, and this is definitely a more trim summary compared to last year. There's no dragging, high-detail technical autopsy of the cell chip this time. We're going to hear a bit more about Blu-ray, though. It's funny, because while Blu-ray eventually becomes the major format, it had very little bearing on this generation. Most games still worked within the limits of 360 disc sizes.
Yeah, I distinctly remember it was only like the latter end with like Wolfenstein and MGS5. I want to think Final Fantasy 13 was one of the first big tentpole things for going like, oh look, on PS3 it's bang, one Blu-ray, and then on 360 it's 3 discs. It was definitely a size gap between the two things that is not marginal.
So, on to the first of our PS3 games, and here comes Phil Harrison, and this guy's been around. Check his Wikipedia, it's just a very basic summary that seems to only get updated when he either arrives at a company or leaves it. He's not a stranger to conferences. He later worked for Microsoft during the launch and early years of the Xbox One. So, there's something about those two consoles and their early generations that I seem to tie together, and it's not just Phil Harrison.
Are you suggesting that he is some kind of albatross that drags down a console's launch?
I'll just say that I'm pretty sure that Phil Harrison shows up at the 2013 conference, and I could not actually believe that they'd hired him. I just thought, don't put him on stage. We saw last time he was on stage. It wasn't good.
It's some kind of... It must have been like a corporate flex going, look who used to be big at Sony and he's with us now. Like, yeah, something along those lines, maybe.
He's a fascinating character. I don't know exactly... I don't know exactly why he only sort of spends a certain amount of time at every company, but he has been a lot of places. I mean, this is his biggest thing, though, working at Sony. So I'll always associate him with this conference in particular, as will Wikipedia. More on that later. He's currently the vice president at Google, leading Stadia and its products. So keep an eye on that wiki page, folks.
Maybe it's just the way his like body language is, but it's something very contempt for those around him, especially for the Eye of Judgment bit, which we're going to talk about. He comes across very.
He does not look impressed throughout this conference. This is largely a product of his doing, all of these game demonstrations, and I don't think he's
not happy with a single one.
It's not going to his plan at all. So, yeah. Anyway. Phil introduces Kazunori Yamauchi to the stage to talk and demonstrate Gran Turismo HD for 15 minutes.
Yeah. Oh God.
I don't have much for this segment because I like racing games. I play quite a few of them, but I absolutely am not the audience for this. But you're always going to see racing games at early gen conferences like this because they always look nice. They're a good way of showing off new hardware.
It's impressive they pick this straight out the gate, and then it takes up a sizable percentage of the actual conference in and of itself, because it's not even new content, it's ported content, isn't it?
Yeah, and it sucks the energy completely out of the conference to begin with.
One race is fine, but 4 or 5 of them, not so much.
Yeah, we get our first hint that the series is starting to sort of slow down with Gran Turismo HD. It's an upscale of Gran Turismo 4 assets to a PS3 resolution. We get lots of footage of races, race after race after race. Kazunori closes the segment saying the next Gran Turismo will look way better than this anyway. This was a waste of time.
Pain, physical pain. Sorry, carry on.
He says we hope to launch the next GT not too far from the launch of the PS3. For anybody keeping track, Gran Turismo 5 Prologue launched in 2007, but Gran Turismo 5 Proper released in 2010, so 4 years after this conference. And the only other thing I have for this is the final observation. Kazunori's translator is dressed like Harry Hill.
No way. Is he?
He's got the really, really big collar on him.
Oh God.
Definitely check it out. I'm glad that he was there to pay homage to the greats.
This shows how much this has drained me already, getting this far.
On to the next segment. Harrison returns to the stage and pulls out, what's that? A trading card? He heads over to the right side of the stage to introduce us to Dr. Richard Marks and the Eye of Judgement. This concept is dead on arrival. The idea is novel. You have a physical game board and playing cards tracked by an iToy camera, and it projects monsters onto the image sent to the TV when you put a corresponding card down. And I get it. I got those AR cards with my 3DS, and they were fun for about 5 minutes. But I've never been convinced by an augmented reality demo at an E3 conference. It's either fabricated overpromise, or in this case, an awkward, sobering experience that is unappealing on the face of it.
This is my first interaction with AR. I think in memory, and I was kind of thinking it was really novel, but then I think back to recent years and how every gaming store I go to, if it has PS3, normally has an Eye of Judgement sat there on its own without an iToy or any cards. So I get the feeling it did not leave much of a splash. I like the idea of it. It's very Yu-Gi-Oh, isn't it? I think that's the point.
It felt more like just maybe a tech demo that Marks had actually just sort of put together just as part of his internal development, and somebody said, oh yeah, make a game out of that. And I mean, I have a lot of time for Dr. Richard Marks. He worked at Sony for a long time. I think he's only just recently left. But he was behind the iToy and the PlayStation Move. I think he had a role in PlayStation VR as well. So all of those kind of technical advancements in peripherals were his forte. But I don't necessarily think this is a massively marketable idea, especially at this point where it's still early HD. So there's not a great deal that you can do with those grainy cameras that they were supplying you with. Never mind, though. Phil knows exactly how to save this segment. He's brought a boss card. A giant rubber duck. Do you get that, by the way? A rubber duck? It's because Sony used rubber ducks in previous tech demos, and Phil had a whole segment at last E3 where he'd landed joke after joke about ducks. Yeah. Sorry, folks. If you're not into the deep lore of Phil Harrison, this will fly right over your head. Coming up next, Kaz Hirai runs down the network capabilities of the PS3. Just talks about what you could expect in terms of features and interface with the next-gen online experience. And it's all
free of charge.
Kaz moves on to talking about PS1 emulation on the PSP. Brilliant feature, by the way. Play Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3 on the go. We're still waiting for the current gen offering of this.
It's this whole segment, isn't it? It's this bit where he's talking about the PS1 and how you can play Ridge Racer, Resident Evil 1, Resident Evil 2. And people had already been doing it, I believe, at this point. It was already like a cracked machine.
Really?
The PSP was a very, very handy portable little emulator for stuff that's all the way at least PS1 back. Like, SNES, NES, Mega Drive, Genesis, I suppose, Master System. It was already a cracked machine, I'm sure, by this point. So the fact that he's basically going, hey, look, we're doing it officially, is it's a bit weird. I'm pretty sure it's the reason it sold so well.
Kaz has a game to show us himself. It keeps us in suspense, but...
It's Ridge Racer! Ridge Racer! Remember that one?
It's Ridge Racer! Ridge Racer!
Oh, God.
Now, I've done it, Steve, so please, give me your best version.
It's Ridge Racer! Ridge Racer! Yeah, that's feeding the YouTube poop machine.
Right, everybody remembers it. Everybody remembers that meme. I'd go to You're the Man Now Dog. I'd watch Ridge Racer memes all day. That was a fulfilled life at 16. What people probably don't remember is Kaz being absolutely rank at this game. He's got a camera over his shoulder, I guess, but he's just bouncing and banging into everything. I don't know why they didn't demote him right then and there.
Whoops.
I mean... For reference, the first Ridge Racer is very hard when you're playing at an angle like 90 degrees to your side.
Yeah, he's like an early YouTube Let's Player. He hasn't got any screen capture stuff where he's trying to get the glare off his window. He's got his dad's camera and it's not going very well at all. Kaz rounds up the segment by emphasizing the viability of legacy content and the importance of its availability. And that is one thing the PS3 did pretty well, even despite technical constraint. And certainly a few shades better than what PlayStation offers now.
Even now, at present day recording, when they announced a initiative to kind of do legacy titles, but for paying money, and it's going to be streamable, and we're not even sure what's offered yet. So, yeah.
Next up, nothing segment about microtransactions, the PlayStation Store, and SingStar. They have the goal to demonstrate SingStar, a karaoke game, without anyone singing. Instead, we watch Phil Harrison continue to narrate his pitch with clips of music videos just playing in the background. The segment ends and the audience claps. They're too polite.
Guitar Hero 1 had already landed at this point, right? It was already making its waves.
It must have done, right? Because it was a PS2 game, so surely. Because I think by 2006, you were getting Guitar Hero 2, surely.
It feels strange to pick SingStar, although I suppose one is a multi-platform thing and one isn't. But at the end of the day, more people are going to want to play with a plastic guitar than yell into a microphone. And you don't even have to sing, Phil. You don't even have to sing. You don't even have to play. You can just pretend to play.
Really, the only reason we're talking about it is because he wants to show that you can buy songs, which would become, obviously, a greater market over the course of this generation.
Oh, yeah. The larval form of microtransactions. Look how eager they all are. Yeah.
Also, if you look at the dev kit that was used for this demonstration, it actually has SingStar microphones plugged in. What was the point, Phil? What does it mean?
Genji 2 is an action game which is based on Japanese history. The stages of the game will also be based on famous battles which actually took place in ancient Japan. For example, so here's this giant enemy crab.
And we're going right back over to the demo station over on the right-hand side because it's time to see Genji 2 in action.
Oh no.
We cut to a very nervous Bill Rich. He's not having a good night, is Bill. He's very nervous. This is exactly why later conferences usually had a pairing demonstrate a game. One to play it, one to narrate, because he cannot do both, and I don't blame him, because if I had to do this on stage, I would crumble. He's trying to actually get like a certain enemy on screen, or he's trying to get to a certain part of the stage, and he just can't do it because he's trying to beat all of these other characters. I mean, it looks like a Musou game, so there's a ton of different characters on screen that he's got to try and defeat, and he's so nervous.
There will also be stages where there will be fighting on horseback, and stages where there will be massive sea battle sequences. But not only that, they will also be able to find new and interesting ways to defeat enemy bosses. And I'll give you an example of that. First. So, let me... Oops, sorry. What I'll do is use Benkei here to flip over this crab on its back. Let's see if he shows up. Oh, here it comes.
It's behind you.
And I just gotta, and we're gonna face the boss once I.
Yeah, it's the scariness of Phil being like it's over to the right, just proper school teacher to on a school stage kind of situation.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of school, I'm getting some school science fair vibes at this point. Like nothing's going well. Phil just looks so disinterested in this. Bill Rich is like, I begged you to look at my demo first. I begged you.
I don't know much more about what this guy's done afterwards, but it feels like he's just a developer who obviously is not good at the social stuff, and they just want to makes the freaking game, And they've trumpeted him out on the stage, and he's now going to become perhaps one of the most famously quotable things about this entire conference.
I mean, the game itself didn't actually look that bad. I thought that Genji 2 looked all right. It certainly looked closer to completion than almost anything else at the conference. And it looked fairly fun. It's just, you can't necessarily sell it when you're trying to play the game.
Definitely. Not to mention, he does kind of shoot himself in the foot where it being based on historical, accurately Japanese battles. He's trying to say that these are based in Japanese historical battles, and then a giant frigging crab walks on screen.
Yeah, and that whole the bridge between that line and the other was probably about like a minute or two.
Oh god.
I have no idea of the historical accuracy of Genji 2 overall, but it would eventually release as Genji Days of the Blade, and yes, the giant enemy crab did make it into the final version as well. Thank God.
I'll switch over to Yoshitsune, hop on its stomach, and you attack its weak point for massive damage.
Just attack its weak spot for massive damage. I need to get that quote out there. It's just...
I'm pretty sure that Phil attacked Bill Rich's weak point of massive damage, with the weak point being stage fright, I guess.
Never to be seen again.
I want to emphasize again that I would be exactly like Bill in this instance. Just because I'm having a laugh doesn't mean that I don't sympathize with him.
Oh, 100%. Nothing but power to him, because they still, the presentation is a complete fucking dumpster fire, but he gets through it. Like, he does it. It may have not gone to plan, but he at least walked in, did what he was meant to do, and walk out.
He did exactly what he was meant to do. Make internet history.
Yeah, we're still talking about it.
Next up is a very small segment on F106, and there's some typical gameplay footage, but there's something missing, according to Phil. A wing mirror, he says, and he pulls out a PSP that's rendering the wing mirror view of the race. You can stick it next to your TV screen and see what's coming up behind you. Now, would you call that a gimmick, Steve?
Let me think. I thought the PlayStation doesn't do gimmicks, Jordan. Like, we've already established this, top of the show.
Exactly. I mean, you can call it whatever you like, but don't you call it a gimmick, because we're not interested in gimmicks. We're not interested in it.
Ignoring the fact that we've already done the Eye of Judgment with the AR camera.
No, that was not a gimmick, because they were not interested. Not interested in gimmicks. Not interested in gimmicks. Also, that feature never comes out.
Really? Oh god. I didn't know that part. That's kind of bad.
Yes, never made it to release. Who would use it? Who would honestly use it? Who would say, yeah, I'm going to drain my PSP's 2-hour battery by sticking it next to the TV so I can squint over every now and then to see if there's a car behind me? It's not like we haven't had rear view mirrors in car games before. I'm pretty sure Ridge Racer, the original Ridge Racer, the Ridge Racer.
Ridge Racer! Yeah, it had one built in the internal camera. I'm trying to figure out the setup. I'm trying to figure out the setup in my head. You'd have to have a steering wheel. You'd have to have a mount for your quote-unquote rear-view mirror, which I don't think would be 100% one-to-one real-time anyway. There's got to be some delay between them.
Have you ever seen, like, somebody's really expensive, maybe like $6,000, driving rig in their home? Have you ever seen 2 PSPs on either side of the screen? I didn't think so.
But not a gimmick. Not a gimmick.
Not a gimmick. Call it anything. Call it shit. Call it vaporware. Call it unreleased. Call it clearly Phil Harrison wheeling out anything that the devs teams might be able to prove. I didn't even think it was actually running in real time. I think it was just a video that he'd stuck on there. Up next, we get a Heavenly Sword demonstration. And, it looks good. Another game pretty close to being done at this point, so it's a competent demonstration. Though I seem to remember a pretty damp response to this game when it came out.
Yeah, I actually remember this one getting rinsed by a very early Yahtzee Croshaw Zero Punctuation. This is like very early days Ninja Theory, isn't it? Which would go on to do Senua's Sacrifice and DMC. Because I recognise Tamim, who's very quiet, and he was very vocal in the DMC promotional hype for that reboot that went was a bit divisive in its fandom.
Yeah, I mean, I like Ninja Theory. I especially liked Enslaved: Odyssey to the West, which kind of felt like a bit of a spiritual follow-up to this game. And yeah, this is their early days. So this is quite impressive for them to sort of come out of the gate and produce something that looks pretty strong. They've since veered into an entirely different territory and genre of games now with the Hellblade series. But since God of War has moved on from the more fixed angle action game, I'd love to see Heavenly Sword make a comeback and fill that space.
And this is definitely all in engine, isn't it? This trailer is like none of this doctored stuff, which has been
correct. This one you could play it on the show floor, I'm pretty sure. So if you like the look of this game, then good news. It's the game that you're going to be getting when it releases. It's
weird, the constant changing tides of games, because I'm pretty sure Ninja Theory are now a Microsoft-owned group, aren't they? And they're a launch title here. It's just it's weird the way history moves.
That is weird. I didn't realize they were owned by them. That's crazy. Moving on to a show reel for upcoming first-party games. We get trailers for Lair, Getaway, Africa, Everybody's Golf, Monster Kingdom, 8 Days, and Uncharted. The first 2 are entirely pre-rendered cutscenes, so very akin to the reel from last year's E3. But a few more titles with actual gameplay get shown, the first of which being Africa. Now, I personally was hyped for Africa somehow. I guess I just sort of liked the strangeness of having, some kind of safari simulator on the biggest stage of gaming. Something about it just seemed sort of a bit wacky about it, I guess. But clearly I was the only person that seemed hyped for it because it never even made it to Europe. So I still haven't even played it. But we did briefly mention Africa in our Pokemon Snap episode, available on Patreon on YouTube right now.
I was going to say, to be honest with you, looking back at it, I had totally forgotten this thing was even a thing until coming in preparation for this. And yeah, it's strange. I bet a lot of these like heavily animated animals were later repurposed for other games. There's something about them giraffes that just makes you think of The Last of Us. And we know the life of recycling. Was this an in-house? Yeah, this is first party, so that's possible as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think that they found new life in other games, but yeah, this game certainly seemed to have a bit of a sort of a damp release as it was, and really didn't make any kind of waves. We had previously talked about how Pokemon Snap, actually adding Pokemon to a photography game is what made it successful, and I take that away, it's maybe not going to be quite as successful. Well, Africa is the example of that. We get a trailer for 8 Days, and this is pure vaporware. A CG cutscene masquerading as gameplay to represent a game that gets no further media after this and would never see the light of day.
Now, Jordan, you strike me as a cultured sort. You've seen the music video for Californication, by Red Hot Chili Peppers. You've seen those pre-rendered adverts of like Coca-Cola parodying Grand Theft Auto and stuff like that.
Yeah.
that looks more likely to be a real game than this ever does. Like, how did anyone not look at this and go, this is the fakest fake thing to ever fake the fake? Like, it looks... even there are video game trailers now by, like, shady indie companies that are, like, about crime and going to, like, level 1 boss or whatever the frig, that look marginally more believable as a game than this. Like, my goodness. Like, this is peak fake.
But we weren't to know better back then. Like, we just saw it and we thought, oh, I guess this is just what the next generation looks like. This is a bit of a deep cut, but it actually reminds me a little bit of like Saturday morning shows that used to have kind of call-in games, like Joe Raz and stuff like that. And it would usually be some kind of pre-rendered sort of gameplay that was basically an arrangement of clips. And then somebody would phone in and say, oh, does Joe go left? Does Joe go right? And then the caller says right or left, and they just play the next video clip. I don't think it was an actual game. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Joe Raz was real. Anyway, who cares? The point is, yeah, it absolutely looks like a fabricated game just on the face of it. But I guess it just sort of flew over my head at the time. Maybe I was just too busy looking at some other games, or maybe I was simply too enamored by the likes of Killzone and Metal Gear Solid 4.
It definitely looks akin to... What's the other game? There's another game that was advertised, gets cancelled.
Getaway.
Yeah, and I swear, like, if it's made by the same company and it looks so similar, they're probably the same game, just never got revealed as such. And both got shelved because they obviously didn't get any real game out of it. It's just pre-rendered tosh.
I seem to recall they were actually by the same studio, but I could be wrong. Maybe they splintered off. But I mean, if you actually have a look at the developer who worked on 8 Days, allegedly, like the rest of their sheet of games is largely SingStar. It's not making...
Not gritty crime action.
Yeah, not making a gritty, I guess, cooperative shooting game.
Where the HUD appears whenever it feels like it, and the camera moves at such a dynamic level you can't believe.
And it's just ironic because, like, Uncharted would go on to do so much better than whatever 8 Days was trying to do anyway, and in a few short years as well. There is so little media for this game. The Wikipedia article actually settled for having a picture of Phil Harrison instead to take up some space. Seriously, go check it out. Is this as bad as Agent or Bioshock for the PlayStation Vita? No, but it's up there. Speaking of vaporware, we'd also just seen The Getaway. Second year in a row it gets shown, and no closer to getting an actual game out of it. Both it and 8 Days would get canned at the same time, following a strategy change by Sony apparently.
Telling you, they're the same game, I promise.
Finally, we have Uncharted, which feels so understated here. This is where hindsight messes with me somewhat, because this turns out to be a pretty good game and an even better series as a whole, but I recall so little buzz around this when it surfaced.
Yeah, especially when you watch the conference, like there was almost a muted reaction to it, and this is weird considering we live in the year 2022 where they've just had, admittedly not the best selling, but they had a blockbuster film based around this franchise, and to come in with such a muted response is bizarre.
And the game actually ends up looking better than it does in the trailers, in my humble opinion. I actually really enjoyed the first Uncharted, but I always kind of considered it as the best is clearly yet to come for this game. Like, it's sort of laying out a really solid foundation, but they can build on this. And boy, did Naughty Dog build on this.
Oh, I would say hands down, Naughty Dog are probably one of the main developers that salvaged the PS3's like early to late years, you know?
Next up, we have Insomniac's Ted Price, who walks on the stage to preview Resistance: Fall of Man, another understated but solid early-gen title for the PS3, and a stuck-on contender for brownest game in existence.
I think this was the first PS3 game I actually had the chance to play with friends when they got their launch PS3. And I have to be honest, like, my only memory of it is literally how grey and violently boring it is. So the fact that now, when we watch this back, all I can be taken away is, oh wow, it's that muted color palette we all know, and he's got God mode on, is all I've got to say. Like, you know, you can see the hit markers of them taking damage. That HP bar does not move. You know,
that is exactly what Bill Rich needed.
Yeah, bless him. Justice for Bill Rich.
Ted Price he's on the PS Plus third tier, which means that he gets to have God mode in his gameplay demonstrations. It's so funny because like I seem to recall that Gears of War got the greater flack for being the sort of
Early,
most greyest game out there. Bearing in mind, they kind of came out around the same time, I guess. But I absolutely think the Resistance is the worst example for this, because it's so brown. And it practically could be a sepia tone over the top of it.
Yeah, especially in this gameplay. It looks like a flashback.
This was the start of that horrible monochromatic trend in games, particularly shooters. So Resistance isn't even sticking out like a sore thumb here. These visuals are expected, desired even.
God, we were so wrong, Jordan. We were so wrong.
It was clearly like, we were going through our teenage phase, as were games.
Not to go back and belabor a point, but it is weird when you think about it, because I imagine the main thrust between Resistance and Gears is Gears had, I believe it was the Mad World trailer was the first trailer, right? And then obviously they've got characters. I can't really, for the life of me, think of a single character in Resistance, but I think Marcus Phoenix at least stands out as that bandana, miserable face man that we at least somewhat associate with the franchise even now.
Basically, the difference maker between Resistance and Gears of War, the reason why Gears of War did so much better than Resistance,
had a character in music.
Gears of War had Coltrane.
Yes!
I'm sorry, Resistance, but if you don't have a character in your game that can have a rap at the end of the game's credits, I'm sorry, but you're the weaker competition.
Coltrane, baby. Woo.
Still have that stuck in my head. Like it's just a rap beat and just woo, yeah, bring it on, sucker. This my kind of shit. it's just 4 minutes of that. It's brilliant.
Yeah, bring it on, sucker. This my kind of shit.
We get some additional trailers for third-party games, including the very first trailer for Assassin's Creed, Gundam Mobile Suit, Coded Arms Assault, Ridge Racer 7, Brothers in Arms Hell's Highway, Tekken 6, with actual gameplay this time, and Sonico 6. These were innocent times.
Is this Sonico 6 trailer? Is this the initial reveal, or is this like, has it already been revealed? Am I going crazy? Because
it was probably around this time. It doesn't make the launch of the PS3. It comes sort of, I think, a couple months afterwards, sort of like the January, February time or so.
So technically Sonico 7 for the PlayStation, not to be that guy.
Yeah, or the reverse EA Sports. They do it a year later.
It looks so much different and paradoxically better than the game we got. Shocker.
Yeah, it's amazing what cutting down gameplay to about 30 seconds can do.
Yeah, exactly.
The trailers continue with Virtua Tennis 3, Virtua Fighter 5, John Woo's Stranglehold, Fatal Inertia, Bladestorm The 100 Years War, and Armored Core 4. There's still a lot of CG trailers, but this whole reel was a pretty good summary of what the first year and a half of the PS3 would look like. Mostly a forgettable catalogue, but there's some prominent names in there for good reasons and bad. And Kaz gives a little woo, alright, when returning to the stage.
Woo! All right.
I like that. He's had a couple moments where he'll be like, yeah, and he's got like a little understated laugh, like right at the beginning, like after they show that show reel of people saying, oh, the graphics are crazy on the PS3.
It's gonna be like taking over the whole world.
It's better than like that one Rage 2 presentation where there's basically someone going, please clap.
Jeb Bush?
I can't remember. It was something similar to that. They had some dude on stage, giant fella, and he just literally was raising his hands as if to say clap. So yeah,
I do love like the awkward sort of corporate cadence. Like I'm sure Kaz is a lovely guy, like in person, and like got like a wonderful laugh, but it's like he's too buttoned up to really kind of like have any proper reaction. So that's what we're getting from him. That's the best we're getting from him. Is a woo. All right.
He's just too straight-laced and serious for this business.
I mean, he really had to power it out of his impulses to not just have like a little sort of like skip of his step when he came back onto the stage.
If memory serves, Bladestorm's basically Dynasty Warriors, but set in the European Middle Ages. And then Armored Core 4 is the last gasp before From Software becomes the Dark Souls machine.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Armored Core 4 gets like, I want to say it gets like another 2 games, like For Answer and Verdict Day, and then it's all like Soul stuff, which is fine. I love me some Souls games, but at the same token, I need some more Armored Core, please. Please, whoever's listening to this right now, send From Software a message.
And now, in what feels like a mandatory allocation for every Sony and Microsoft conference, It's the EA segment, and more specifically the EA Sports segment. CEO Larry Probst, played here by Michael McKean, is here to provide 2 baffling tech demos. The first is for NBA Live and the apparent leap in player AI and awareness, I guess. But to get the message across, it just shows how stupid the current PS2 AI is. What did you think of this?
I have to be honest, and this is the same for all conferences. When EA Sports starts ringing in, that's normally when Steve goes for a quick water break or a cigarette break. Unfortunately for this case, it's like, yeah, it's okay. I'm not invested enough. I just not.
That's when you sort of let you power down for a little sort of 10-minute nap. You won't have missed anything of consequence.
It's time for a micro sleep. They're talking the sports.
It's now a trigger. If you hear EA Sports, you're out.
Yeah, but the thing is, John, if they said, yeah, here's new SSX, I'd be like, right, okay, I am invested. But when it immediately goes to football, and I know you love your football, but NBA and golf, I'm just like, yeah, it's nap time.
New SSX. Now I've got your attention. I'd like to talk about EA Sports.
Yeah, that's how I do it. That's how they keep me in.
The second demo is for Tiger Woods Golf. Not really with much golf. It features a pretty decent looking but still very uncanny valley Tiger Woods and a run through of expressions and emotions he can display. Cool. Okay, we're done here. They didn't have any expressions of him being caught cheating on his wife.
Oh, sweet.
It is strange when you think about it that they run us through expressions and emotions, because whenever you see the real man in person, he's very not emotive, is he? I mean, admittedly, the clips you see generally of him playing golf, so he's got a very stern face, but even then, he's very just flat, not really emotive guy.
And it's golf. It's golf. I don't think people necessarily buy that game because they want to hear Tiger Woods in a monologue. This isn't Heavy Rain. We don't really need to think about what his expression is.
Obviously, I'm picking up EA Golf for the narrative.
Exactly. I tell you what game would be good to demonstrate all these different expressions. Probably something like NBA Live. It's something where, if you look at FIFA or NBA Live now, you see there's a celebration button that you press when you score a goal or you get a hoop. I don't know what basketball terms are. There's something about the sort of celebration in those sports games that probably has a greater impact on the people playing them than golf. I think people who play golf just want it to be a better golf game.
I'm just, part of me is wanted to ask the comment section, is it get a hoop? The same token, yeah, the fact that technology is showing though is good, right? There's a bit more interactivity. I don't know, I'm trying to pay its dues.
Final Fantasy 13 is up next. This is actually one of its very first reveals. Back when it was at least assumed, if not outright stated, to be for PS3 only. It would later get announced to be coming to the Xbox 360 at E3 2008, kissing their business goodbye. Never played much of the series, but I found the pre-release material for this game fascinating. They definitely bordered on unrealistic for the specs, but trailers like this is actually what got me excited for next gen back in 2006.
I'm gonna say it's surprising how on model it is. I know it's CG, I know it's pre-rendered, but it looks startlingly close to what we get. And the fact that Kaz mentions Versus 13, which eventually goes through the ringer and gets recycled as Final Fantasy 15 this early on, is mental to me. Divisive a game it may be in the fandom, this game looks good here, and it's not far from what we're actually going to get.
Obviously, the fandom might have something different to say, but I think that Square Enix have handled their reveals pretty well for the most part. This got announced, it looked great, and I think that the final product did live up to expectations in a lot of visual aspects. And yeah, even with Versus, even though that seemed to go missing for a long period of time, it did eventually come out as a game on its own. So they certainly kind of honored that initial hype. It's kind of funny to think that Final Fantasy 13, at the time, we were just wondering when it was going to come out. It got to a point where it was kind of people weren't sure when Final Fantasy 13 was going to end.
Yeah, it became its own little trilogy. The fact that they got 2 full sequels, and then after Lightning Returns comes out, which is the third one, people are still going, so when's Versus 13, guys? We are now 5 years post-launch of the original. And then 15 gets announced, and people are like, hang on a minute! It's strange. It's very strange seeing how this all formulates at the start. I actually kind of want to go back and dig deeper into it because, spoilers for this conference, this may be one of the best trailers here.
Yeah, it's such a clean trailer, and I think it probably played off part of what they were doing with the tech demo they had at the previous E3 for Final Fantasy VII. And again, another example of Square Enix at some point honoring anything that they show. So yeah, if Square shows something, it might take a while, but you still end up getting it seems. And speaking of trailers I was obsessed with, here's Metal Gear Solid 4, a game that seemed to change at every new trade show it appeared at around this time. This is still some way off from the final look of the game, or its events, but it's getting there. It's a very anime-style trailer, lots of out-of-context dialogue, interspersed with the overarching monologue of how war has changed, all set to footage of a Middle Eastern war zone and character reveals. It concludes in much the way you'd close any trailer, a lingering shot of Old Snake putting a pistol in his mouth. Cut to black, gunshot, and Kaz walks out for another woo! No, he doesn't, but let's imagine he does, right?
Oh, God. Oh, that's making the edit. That's fun.
Woo! All right.
This is probably the trailer, isn't it? That, you know, all flubs and mess ups aside, this is the one that everyone talks about for a while afterwards.
Yeah. Oh, I love this trailer. I love the idea of how many questions it seemed to bring up. I think this might have been the reveal of Raiden in his new getup, and I think everybody's first question is, what the hell happened to Raiden? And you know, his whole line of "now it's my turn to save you" is just. I couldn't have been more hyped for Metal Gear Solid 4. I just thought, even though like some of the. Even the dialogue just in this trailer is like so silly and sort of ridiculous. I was so into it.
I mean, it wasn't in war. It was in Japanese, Steve. What are you doing? You're not David Hayter. Calm down.
It was. I was very much into it, and I was very hyped. And Metal Gear Solid 4 was one of the chief reasons that I did buy a PS3. So I was there at launch when it came out and enjoyed it very much. So yeah, this is a really good trailer. Obviously, that parting shot, no pun intended, does end up being used in memes around the time once the price was revealed. I still can't believe that actually made it into the trailer, especially because I'm pretty sure like on the actual conference feed they cut away to the audience. Now you can't see anybody's faces, but I just love the idea that they actually did have actual full pullouts. Like, you see this? There's like thousands of, probably not thousands, I don't know how many people are there, but let's say hundreds, watching this virtual character put a gun in his mouth. And this is
an icon at this point as well.
And this is supposed to get us excited for the game, by the way.
But my only takeaway now, in the present day, is how the hell did they get away with it? That's extreme even now. I don't think you could end a trailer with a person, you know, miming suicide.
I mean, I would say, why would you do that? Surely that's not going to sell a game. But it certainly did. That game is one of the best sellers on PS3. I bought it, and this is one of the trailers that made me bought it. So what do I know?
And it's still festering in like digital prison until someone can figure out, you know, Blue Point looking at you, remaking it or re-releasing it, because now you can play literally every other MGS on some modern system in some way, shape, or form, bar this one. Did you notice as well? I mean, the character models aren't all there yet, are they? Snake looks somewhat different from his final version, I believe.
Yes.
Mel looks different as well. And yet Otacon and I want to say Roy Campbell look almost perfectly to the final thing. So
absolutely, Roy Campbell especially, yeah. But Snake goes through so many different transformations. I don't know when it was actually first shown, because it might have been that MGS4 was first shown at TGS. But yeah, he goes from actually being sort of age appropriate for how much time has passed since Metal Gear Solid 2 to Metal Gear Solid 4, and then at some point, I think previous to this conference, maybe at TGS or maybe at the past E3, we see Old Snake, and obviously that is the lasting sort of design for Snake in Metal Gear Solid 4. I mean, Metal Gear Solid 4 was a very impressive looking game when it came out in 2008, and it still sort of stands out to me, even though I think it probably has aged poor in some respects, but yeah, it was very ambitious back in the day. Our penultimate segment summons Ken Kutaragi to the stage for one last showing. He's got a big secret to reveal. The PS3 controller now has gyro, and it's also not shaped like a toilet seat anymore, but it's also got gyro. Can we see it in action? Unfortunately, yes.
He looks like he's literally snuck out of Kamurocho this time. And I know Ken Kutaragi is known for their flamboyant presence. I feel like they have a distinct style and they friggin' roll with it. But this time, they feel like Yakuza boss straight up. The nice kind, not the nasty kind.
Yeah, the father of the PlayStation has nipped out for cigarettes. I mean, reveal a game controller. Because he hasn't quite crushed the spirit and determination of enough developers yet, Phil Harrison calls Warhawk director Dylan Jobe to demonstrate the new 6-axis gyro controls in his game. Now here's the thing. Gyro can be great, and gyro for flight controls can work even better. So something has obviously gone desperately wrong here, because this was a train wreck.
That's putting it mildly and politely. It makes the whole concept look superfluous and just awkward. Like the amount of targets they're firing, and they've got homing missiles they miss with. The actual way they try and pilot the craft, they can't get any action on screen. They have to fire and move the thing around. And then when they try and land it, they don't even fully land it on the deck, do they? They like hang off barely. Like, oh yeah, that's a ring endorsement for this new technological feat. I mean, the Wii wasn't even a thing yet, right? Dolphin was still, or Revolution? I can't remember.
This was in response to the Wii, because the Wii had previewed at the TGS the previous year, so we knew that motion control was coming. But yes, this was pretty bad, because, here's Dylan, remember, he's the director of this game, struggling to pilot a jet using gyro controls. He's flailing his arms, he's missing targets, he barely lands the jet on the platform. It's horrible. We've just watched a new controller and game be introduced and disemboweled in about 5 minutes. We're ending this conference on possibly the worst note. Almost. And so it's time for perhaps the most infamous moment of the entire conference, and a decision that set the tone for Sony's first half of the generation. The closer of the night, it's the date and price. Kazurai, with all the bewildering confidence and hubris of an exec who's watched his company never put a foot wrong in the last 10 years, announces PS3 will release for $499 and $599 on November 17th, 2006. A year late and $200 more than the Xbox 360. Adjusted for inflation, that's almost $850 in 2022.
It's insane, isn't it? It's genuinely insane. This is the moment when Icarus has flew too close to the sun. This is the humbling, I suppose in a way, Sony needed. The reaction and blowback to this. Now, this is coming from someone who was going to get a PS3 and was really hyped to get a PS3 until he realized he had to wait even longer and that the 360 was cheaper. This is it. This is the one that put the bullet in it and made me get on the Xbox train first.
This was a real sort of slap in the face, I think, for people that had been patient and had been waiting, because not only were you not necessarily going to be impressed by the games that were being shown, but then to kind of like have that final insult of this is how much you're going to have to pay to get it. Bearing in mind, that same month, I'm pretty sure Gears of War had launched. So you could get the Xbox 360, you could probably get an extra controller, Gears of War, Xbox Live Gold, Elder Scrolls Oblivion, maybe Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter, for about the same price, if not cheaper.
You could probably have picked up a 360 and a Wii for cheaper than getting a one PS3.
It feels so diametrically opposed to what had made the Sony formula work so well over the previous 10 years. Like, I remember old clips where it would be like a report on the N64 coming out, and publications or TV shows would really make a point of that you could get the PS1 for much cheaper than you could the Saturn or the N64, and you could get all these extra games for it. That's not always the case, but it's always an important factor that does play into a role of marketing, because it just means that your competitors really get to reap that marketing ploy of, well, we're cheaper, therefore you get more games with us.
Now, my memory's hazy, but back in the Saturn days, I'm sure it was a case of like the Saturn came out and it was like, yeah, the Saturn will cost blah, 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 like 400, 300 or something. And the PlayStation conference was literally just a 200. It's the exact inverse, isn't it? Like, instead of going, yeah, we're going to cost more, lads. Check out our controller.
Exactly. The only thing that didn't happen is that Peter Moore of Microsoft didn't run onto the stage and take the microphone from Kazurai and say, by the way, Xbox is cheaper. But it was the same kind of thing happening. And it's one of those infamous moments you can't just look at and just think, what were they thinking?
I mean, do you want to do your very best, James Rolfe? What were they thinking, John?
I mean, what were they thinking?
What were they thinking? Back into the room.
So Sony came in declaring they must take risks, and boy, risks did they take. But did they pay off? Let's head into our wrap-up segment. So, what happened next? Well, the immediate response was one of mockery, both for the pricing but also just the lackluster showing from Sony at this E3. It didn't help that Microsoft and Nintendo would follow them up with reveals for Gears of War, Mario Galaxy, Wii Sports, and Halo 3 at their conferences. The price, offering, and late arrival to the scene would impact PS3 in the US especially, where it had to square up against an embedded 360 user base. Despite that, PlayStation 3 eventually still evolved into an excellent and compelling system for the gen's best games, and arguably had a better close to its lifetime than the Xbox 360. I actually went and looked it up, and it has just about outsold the Xbox 360 in lifetime sales, so it was a bit of a long con, but they got there. And I suppose that is in large part credit to how they handled their mid-generation and late-generation output in terms of games, pricing strategy, and general updates to the SKUs.
Yeah, this whole thing feels like the humbling, very much a needed thing. But it taught them a lesson that I don't know if they've fully learned from in recent years, but for at least a while it stuck. That they can't be top dog and just assume that they can get away with anything. And I am actually surprised. I actually thought the PS3 had just smashed everything. Eventually, just from sheer brand power, had smashed the Xbox 360 to pieces by the end. I didn't realize it was a close call.
Bear in mind that the PS2, was at 153 million or over 150 million consoles shipped, and it's only just made over half of that. And I feel
that's
like
a present day.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I'm pretty sure if PS4 hasn't surpassed it, it probably will, as will the PS5. So it's definitely sort of sticks out, and it was the first Sony home console that failed to sell over 100 million units. So even though it did manage to reap back some of its numbers towards the end of the generation, it'll always be stuck out based on this conference. So what about this conference? Let's give our final words, because was this conference as bad and as infamous as we thought? Steve, your final thoughts.
Yeah, I think if it's not clear to everybody now, like I am technically somewhat of an observer. I only caught this after the fact, even in the initial run. And yeah, its infamy outlives its legacy. The things that people remember aren't the games. They're the flubs, they're the mess ups, they're the memes. And yeah, it's strange. I mean, it actually ends before Kaz gives you the price and Six Axis. The last two game trailers are pretty decent trailers, especially considering the games that come out afterwards. But then you think about what it's going up against, it's crazy because, as you mentioned, Gears of War, Mario Galaxy, those are, Halo 3 as well, and Wii Sports, very big titles. This could not have been a worse time to roll out stuff like that 8 Days trailer. They've got games that really mostly won't pass muster. There's quite a lot of filler there. We've got FF13 that will eventually become cross-gen, and we've got MGS4, which is now sadly maligned and imprisoned on the PS3. So otherwise, it's dross. Realistically speaking, some of the games look a bit nice, but then tentpole titles are coming for them. They've got a really, really awful price point, and that level of smugness. Yeah, the conference is pretty bad. It's pretty bad, and it shows. Even if you look back at 2005 as well, they were kind of up their own bum a bit there, but nowhere near as bad with this one.
And it's ironic, really, because Sony came into this conference saying that next gen doesn't start until they say it does. And yet, once they actually entered the next gen, I still felt like, because of the impact of this conference, and generally the management of their actual games development, they still didn't really start their next gen until maybe 2 or 3 years into the generation itself. So we're talking about 2008. And so I just recall from my own personal experience that the PS3 had a really sort of diminished launch in the UK. Like, it came out and it just had that kind of markings of a less successful console because you were finding a lot of bundles were getting price drops. It was being pushed more for its media capabilities, which are brilliant, by the way, but it still was not necessarily being pushed in the same kind of way that the 360 was. And the 360 was just doing really well. So this definitely had an impact, and it definitely stands as one of the worst conferences out there.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd say it's the worst. Like, I feel like that we have other fruit to pull from a tree. There are other infamous moments, but this is perhaps Sony's biggest misstep, isn't it? Or at least the biggest, most prolific one.
if you actually go and have a look at the most expensive consoles ever, the PS3 is still pretty high on that list. The only consoles that are above that are, frankly, the other infamous consoles. Like, I'm pretty sure the 3DO's on there.
Oh god, yeah, definitely.
And the Philips CDI as well, somehow. But that about does it for this episode of Memory Card Lane. There's no wheel to spin for this episode. I think there's been enough wheel spinning on that conference that we just covered. So join us next time back on the main series with Sherwin for Pilot Wings on the Super Nintendo. Don't forget you can get early access to new episodes of Memory Card Lane over on our Patreon. For more info, visit patreon.com/FASprayPod. And comment section, let us know. Did we get it right? Did we get it wrong? Is this actually as bad as we thought? You can also find me on Twitter at SeroBox64 and Steve at FBSteveWasTaken. And until next time, see ya.
Bye. I have to be honest. Yeah. I did like study this conference for as many times as I could get through just to make sure. And every time I've missed it, Jordan, I'm like, right, well, I've got a chance to watch it again. So yeah,
you can finally say farewell to it now. Like,
yeah, until we come back and do the Xbox one.
You wake up in like night sweats, and it's like
just a salmon pink shirt in front of me.
I had the nightmare about the wing mirror again.